Amen. Okay, thank you. Today is Valentine's Day, so I allowed my wife to cook a meal for 100 people and took her there. Now, I'm actually going to speak on the quintessential love chapter, Luke chapter 6. No, that's not the quintessential love chapter from your typical. You were expecting 1 Corinthians 13 on February 14th, I would assume. But no, we're going to talk from Luke chapter 6. And the title of the sermon or the message, the challenge tonight is How to Destroy Your Enemies, a biblical response to personal injustice. In the crow's nest, I don't see the back PowerPoint. I don't know if that's supposed to be on or if I just can't see it, and I didn't think I was that old, but maybe I am. That'll be helpful to me. Otherwise, you'll get the better side of me and look at my back here while I check through these things. But how to destroy your enemies, and that's the conversation we're going to have. It's a hard topic to study, and even more, a harder topic to practice. And I'm also going to test here, see if my clicker is working. Did not. Did I turn it off? I have to make the beep noise. Beep. I'll turn it on. Got to be smarter than the clicker. So here in Luke chapter 6, and also in Matthew chapter 5. These are common passages from that perspective. Here in Luke chapter 6, we find Jesus near the middle of his earthly ministry. He's not quite to the middle, but he's been around for more than a day or two. And word has spread of his miracles and of his teachings throughout Galilee. From that perspective, really from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. So this whole encompassing area, from that perspective, his fame has become. And so he's already challenged the conventional thinking. He's already challenged the conventional thinking of the Israelites, especially even of the Pharisees. Earlier in chapter 6 of Luke tonight, as we're looking at it, he already stirred up enough trouble to make the Pharisees super mad at him and start conspiring against him simply for pulling some corn on a Sabbath day and eating it, and for healing a man's hand on the Sabbath day from that perspective. So he's already stirred up enough anger even from the Pharisees. And so he's beginning to challenge people, beginning to challenge the way that they've been thinking for years, okay? And that's because the thinking that they are following is wrong. And that's why he's putting this in front of them to make them think differently. Now, just before he starts this particular sermon, here as you look in Luke chapter 6, we see that he has called specifically the 12. While there are many disciples are following him, he's called specifically the 12. And he sits them down along with the giant multitude of people and says, let me tell you how to act. Right? And he gives this most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, that provides practical wisdom to his specially chosen disciples that is intended to change the way they think about themselves and about others. And that's really what we look at in the Sermon on the Mount. It's intended to change the way we think about ourselves and about others. Let's go ahead and read in Luke chapter 6. So turn there if you would, please, Luke chapter 6. And we're going to start in verse 27. And Jesus says, and he says this many times, he says, "But I say unto you," right? That's his commentary. "But I say unto you, which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. For if ye love them which love you, what thank have ye? For sinners also love those that love them. And if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners, and to receive as much again. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again, and your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful, and to the evil. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. So Jesus goes through a series of things. We're going to look in this a little bit. He says, but I say unto you. Change your thinking is what but I say unto you means, right? So you had an idea, but you need to think differently. The injustices that were suffered by the Jews at this particular time, he goes through several of them there, but think about them. He points out to them, let's see, in verse 29, smite thee on the cheek, right? So physical violence was common. Separating you from your company and ostracizing that happens to the Jews. Reproach you, slander or libel, right? Despitefully use you. That is, they take advantage of you, take advantage of your kindness. Borrow from you and do not repay. Anybody have children? Sorry, I went there. Borrow from you and do not repay. All right? Initial agreement to return credit, but just kidding. I'm not going to do it. And then you're out. Compel you to go a mile. We've heard this story, probably most of us, but under Roman law, anybody that was not a Roman citizen could be compelled to carry a Roman citizen's things for up to a mile. All right? And so he says, they can do this to you. Think about that. That's actually 2 miles, because if it's a 1 mile in the direction you were not going, then you got to go back the whole mile to get back to where you started in the first place, right? And they can sue you. They can take legal action against you. These are the injustices that were suffered by the Jews at the time of Christ's preaching this sermon. And so really the Jews had this grand opportunity to play the victim card, right? We are always being taken advantage of, and our life is so miserable. We should fight back, right? We heard of the Zealots. There was a group, in fact, one of the disciples that Jesus called to him was a zealot, and that was a group that was ready to take up arms and replace, fight back for the Jews and for Israel against these evil Romans, etc. And they had this grand opportunity to act this way, to behave this way. Jesus spends his time in this sermon and says, but I say unto you. And he says, let's change the way we think. So really this whole passage that we just read deals with this personal injustice aspect of things. And so Jesus says, let's take first look tonight at what Jesus says we need to change, okay? And so he says, first of all, that the focus of our actions, that we need to focus on our actions when responding to personal injustice. And the key word there is the fourth one, which says our. So I'm noticing that these are smaller than I would have anticipated. I had forgot that we were in this room, and so I didn't make them bigger. I apologize for that. I'll try and give you the blanks very clearly. The focus of our actions when responding to personal injustice, that's the first thing. And so when we look at that, we have to prioritize personal righteousness. We have to prioritize personal righteousness. We have to give account of our own actions, okay? I mentioned anybody have kids. The number of times that I say to my children, well, yeah, but what did you do? is a lot. It's more than once when I speak this way, right? So Romans chapter 14 and verse 12 says, so then every one of us shall give an account of everybody else in the church to God. No, that's not what I put up there. I didn't hide it in the small print. So then every one of us shall give account of himself, herself, to God. Self. right? 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10 says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad." The focus here is, what are you doing? Not what is somebody else doing. And so when we're dealing with personal injustice, as Jesus goes through this teaching, he doesn't say that whatever this other person is doing guides what you do. He says it doesn't matter what the other person does to you. Here's how you act. You're in charge of your actions. Note, really, when we look at the passage, you can look back down at it here. I rewrote some of it up there, verse 27 through 30. But there's an understood you, right, from a grammar perspective, that's found in these verses. You can see it there a little bit, but it's you love your enemies. You do good. You bless them. You pray for them. Okay? These are the things... just from a grammatical perspective, it's you who has to do the action. He doesn't give any list here of what somebody else is supposed to do. He says, this is what you do. You. And that's where the focus is. So it's not just that we must prioritize our personal righteousness in our actions, but also we need to recognize that the benefit of others is prioritized over the benefit of self. So those are the next blanks there. The benefit of others is prioritized over the benefit of self. In these instances here in Luke chapter 6, who gets the upper hand in all of these scenarios? Verse 29, "Him that smiteth thee on one cheek, offer also the other." Who gets the upper hand? The guy that's smiting or the guy that's getting smitten? Right? Well, technically, the guy that is smiting gets a double chance, right? Not the guy that's getting smitten. That's not an upper hand. That's not great. He just got the upper hand twice. But it's through all of this. The upper hand is on the person who's doing wrong in these examples. And this is a challenge to the way of thinking that the Pharisees, that the Israelites, that the Jews had seen throughout their time. It's a challenge to the way that we think, because when somebody gets the upper hand, our response is to even the playing field, right? It's not turn the other cheek, it's get their cheek back, right? From that perspective. So he's really focusing that. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 kind of highlight this point as Paul teaches the Philippian believers. He says, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." Whose benefit is the focus of these verses? Is it mine? No, it's the other it's others literally is used in the passage. Others is the benefit. Others is the focus. Not me, others. So the focus of our actions when responding to personal injustice is that we have to prioritize personal righteousness, and we have to make sure that the benefits of others is prioritized over the benefit of self. Now, we get here in this passage to a very familiar verse. Many of these verses are familiar, but how many of you have heard of the golden rule, right? So what is the golden rule as you would, if somebody stopped you on the street and said, "What's the golden rule?" Don't look at your Bible. Tell me what the golden rule is. Somebody should. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That's the golden rule. It's not a word for word directly here, but that's what we hear as the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Did you read ahead on my notes? No. However, I think sometimes we misunderstand the golden rule as it's written in scriptures, right? I think we need to re-understand it a little bit. Most of the time, the golden rule is spoken of or applied or discussed in a selfish manner, right? It says, I'm going to be nice to make sure that people are nice to me, right? Or I'm not going to lie so that hopefully nobody will lie to me, right? It's always in, if I do this, then hopefully somebody will be nice back to me. That's how the world as a whole. If I talk to anybody, not just churchgoers, but if I went to International Mall and stopped 100 people and said, what's the golden rule? I'd probably get 40 or 50 to say something similar to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Right? That's a very common understanding of a golden rule. But I don't think that's really what the context is, right? We're looking at this context, and all the things before and after this are mistreatments, right? So I don't think this is actually the way that we need to look at the golden rule. I think there's the verse 31 is where we get the golden rule. It says, "And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise." So that's the King James version of the golden rule from the good old Elizabethan language there. But when we look at the context, it's really more like this. If I were the person smiting, how would I want the person being smitten to respond to me? Do we see where that changes our outlook, our view of that particular aspect? Because if I'm the person smiting, well, I really hope they don't smite me back. You know, that's what I hope for from that perspective. I would expect, or I should expect, that they would hit me back. And that's what Jesus goes on to say in these successive verses around returning tit for tat, right? Returning exactly what was given back to you. Now, remember, as he's going through this sermon, he's certainly preaching to the multitude, but he's preaching first to his disciples, right? Telling them how to change their thinking and how they need to change the way that they think. And he knows, remember, he's God, as Jesus, he is God, so he knows that these disciples are going to get cursed and despitefully used and smitten and their coats taken away and all these and many more terrible things for his name's sake, right? So he knows these things are going to happen, and he's preparing them for the fact that this will happen. How am I supposed to respond? And he's not telling them, be ready for this so you can, parry the punches or something like that. That's not the focal point on this. So I think we really need to make sure that we have a proper application of Luke chapter 6 and verse 31. And that really makes a major difference between the believer's response to personal injustice and the world's response to personal injustice. And God goes through, Jesus in his preaching goes through in these next verses about an explanation of this golden rule, right? The golden rule is not about showing kindness in hopes that someone will not be mistreating us. Okay? It's not about showing kindness in hope of keeping us from mistreatment, but rather about showing kindness in the face of mistreatment. Right? He says here, let's see, in verse 32, "For if ye love them which love you, what thank have ye? For sinners also love those that love them." And the end of verse 33 and the end of verse 34. "Well, sinners also do even the same." So sinners reciprocate in kind, good and evil, right? If you're in the business world and you are at work and you are a nice person at work, you know what? A lot of times you get niceness back. Doesn't matter whether they're saved or not saved, whether they're, any of those things. Generally, you get that. If you're a jerk at work, you're probably going to be treated like a jerk and then get fired, right? That's an expectation around normalcy for sinners, for the world, for everybody, from human nature, from that perspective. However, what Jesus is saying here in this passage is it's got to go way beyond that for you. because you're not the world. Okay? Children of God reciprocate good no matter what. Every time. That's it. There's never a reciprocation of evil when it's the children of God. At least that's the way Christ is describing it in his teaching of this is how you need to change the way you think. Because before, you might say, I do unto others, right? And do unto others is, you mistreat me? Watch out. I'm going to get you, right? And that's not it. That's not it. Sinners can do that, right? Some verses that kind of help us flesh that out a little. 1 Peter, this is a letter from Peter to the believers at that time frame, and you may recall that Peter was mistreated once or twice, and in fact he got it wrong because he whipped out a sword when they were trying to take Jesus, and he was going to go after them, right? And Jesus said, "No, hang on a second. Those that live by the sword die by the sword. That's not how we do." And so Peter had forgotten Luke chapter 6 from that teaching, even at that point. But by the time he was developed enough spiritually to be able to write the letter of Peter here in chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, he says, "Finally, be all of one mind, having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil." So he's changed his mind. He's done what Christ said when he said, "But I say unto you." He changed the way he thinks. Not rendering evil for evil, nor railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. And so he spends some time here. Here's somebody who we know, because it's written in the Bible, that he did it the wrong way at one point, and he's changed his mind. He's changed the way that he thinks, and now he's teaching others, knowing that this is a hard concept to put into practice. Romans chapter 12, Paul is writing to the Roman believers, and he's giving a grand treatise on really the entire concept of Christianity, from the need for salvation all the way through sanctification and everything in between. And here in chapter 12, he's begun to shift his focus on how do we act now that we're saved and we have the Holy Spirit, right? And in verse 17 and through to the end, he continues and gives us some of these treatise points. Recompense to no man, evil for evil. So he got the point, just like Peter did, right? Provide things honest in the sight of all men, if it be possible, as much as lies within you. There again, it's the focus is on your actions, not somebody else's. As much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves. Don't get back at people. Right? But rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but," again, but, "overcome evil with good." Right? So the first crucial point that Jesus is talking about here in this responding to personal injustice is this: focus on your actions, not somebody else's. Focus on your actions. Now that we've focused on our own actions, he also realizes that it's going to be hard. And so he gives us an example that we can follow. There is an example that we can follow when responding to personal injustice, and that is, first of all, God the Father. God the Father. And he gives that right here in the passage, Luke chapter 6 and verse 35. Near the end of the passage, he says, "For he," speaking of the highest there, "for he, God, is kind unto the thankful and to the evil." And even if you look over in the parallel passage of Matthew chapter 5, which is the same Sermon on the Mount, at the end of that passage in verse 45, he says, "That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust." Now, if anybody could send rain on only the just and not the unjust. God would be able to do that. And he could if he wanted to, but he doesn't, right? And so Jesus points out, he says, hey, there is an example. There is somebody that's already doing this, okay? Showing the kindness to everyone and not just to those that are kind or that are good to him. Jesus wanted to remind the disciples, okay, that the standard is who? The next door neighbor who's not really that good. The standard is the pastor. He's a little better than the rest of us. I don't know. Pastor will tell me that not to say that later on. No, the standard is God, right? And back again to Matthew chapter 5, we see he closes out that passage, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Right? So that's our standard. 1 Peter 1 in chapter 16, or 1 in verse 16, before he has gone at the end of the letter and told them, hey, overcome evil with good, he says, be holy for I am holy. Don't forget that. That's our standard. So that's where we're striving. That's where we are going, what we're striving after. But it's not just the example of God the Father. It's also the example of God the Son. Right? Now, this is Jesus who is speaking here, and these things had not necessarily happened as of yet from their perspective. He's teaching, and the times that he would suffer would be more in the future, though he is already being mistreated, ostracized. A prophet is not without favor except in his own country, right? From that perspective, he says the birds have nests and foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's already being mistreated in ways. He's already being targeted by the Pharisees, though they haven't actually done anything about it yet. They're planning. And so we today, in looking backwards, have the example of Jesus Christ, right? And specifically in his mistreatment around the cross. Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 7 prophesies this and tells us what happened. But there's a key phrase in here, I think, that goes along with this here. It says, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. And then more is added. He brought as a lamb to the slaughter and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. It says twice in that same verse, he opened not his mouth. There's an example that even at this point when he was preaching it, the disciples and any other Jews who had spent time listening to the Old Testament read in the synagogue would be able to recognize that this was something that could be expected of the Messiah, right? Back again to 1 Peter, later on in that chapter 3 that we talked about earlier, Peter writes, for it is better, if the will of God be so, that ye suffer for well-doing. This is what we're talking about in Luke chapter 6, suffering for well-doing, than for evil-doing. Suffering for evil-doing makes sense, right? And that's what the sinners and the publicans do, so to speak. And then he reminds us that it's, for Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God. Right? And so recognizing that we do have these examples that we can follow. And to think about it, really, when we talk about Jesus Christ, what are our injustices today in 2024? What are our injustices? Are we being tortured? Are we being spat on? Are we being crucified, beaten, killed? These are not things that are common to us. There are places in the world where there is some of that, but they are definitely not common to us. I mean, our suffering is somebody unfollowing us on Twitter, right? Oh, my Twitter account went down, or X, I guess whatever the new term is that Elon Musk has come up with. Somebody slams a door in our face. I mean, these are our sufferings for righteousness, right? That's not to be compared. That we have an example. We have an example of someone who didn't open their mouth, someone who treated people kindly and righteously no matter what they were doing to him. And that's where we're chasing after, the example that we're going after and we're following. Last thing. So we talked about the idea that, first of all, we need to focus on our actions in responding to personal injustices, not other people's actions. Secondly, that there is an example to follow when responding to personal injustices. And then lastly, there are rewards for rightly responding to personal injustice. And Jesus tells us about those, kind of puts that out there. We go back to Luke chapter 6, right? And he says in verse 35, in the middle of verse 35, it says, "And ye shall, and your reward shall be great." Yay. I don't know what that reward is just while they're sitting here talking, right? They just hear, oh, rewards. Maybe they were starting to drift off, or they were like, I don't know about any of this crazy stuff. This being nice or letting somebody take my coat. I don't want any of that. Oh, wait, there's rewards. I'll start paying attention, right? Because there are rewards. And so that first reward that he talks about is that we have a relationship with the Father. It says here in verse 35, "And ye shall be the children of the highest." He says, your reward shall be great, and ye shall be called the children of the highest. That is a reward. I mean, a label to follow, right? Or a label to chase after. Children of the highest, right? And what happens is when the actions that we do follow the pattern that God and His Son have set, then it is obvious to everyone that we are children of the highest, right? And that is a reward. Over in Matthew chapter 5, before he goes into this long list of these things, earlier on, Matthew chapter 5 and verse 12, he says, "Rejoice and be exceeding glad." He just told them to rejoice when people are reviling you and mistreating you, right? That's what he gave in verse 11 there in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "Rejoice and be exceeding glad." Not just like tolerate it. Oh, well, I can get through this. Rejoice and be exceeding glad. Why? Because of suffering? No, that's not why. Because your reward is great in heaven. For great is your reward in heaven. So the reminder is that the rewards are future, okay? Somebody's not going to punch you and then hand you a 20 and then punch you and then hand you another 20. That's not how it works. The rewards are in the future, okay, from that perspective. Romans chapter 8 and verse 18, I don't think I put it on the PowerPoint here, but gives us the thoughts from Paul as he's describing these things. And he says, "For I reckon that," side note, that's how we know Paul is from the South, "For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." Okay? So whatever little suffering we have because somebody unfollowed us on Twitter or somebody slammed a door in our face or that type of thing is nothing. And even if it's a greater suffering, think about the sufferings Paul had already gone through at the time that he wrote this to the Roman believers, and was saying these sufferings are so nothing to be compared with how awesome it'll be in heaven, right? Keeping in mind that and the comparison, not even just comparison to Jesus, try comparing to Paul in the sufferings, right? The rewards that we see also for rightly responding to personal injustice also are not just that we have a relationship with the Father, but the responses from our fellow man validate that we have done rightly. Now, we're not doing these in order to get validation from our fellow man. And not always will our fellow man recognize this immediately. Right? But the responses that we will get from our fellow man will validate that we have done rightly. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 7 says this, "When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him." There's a couple of actors in that verse, right? So who's the first actor? First actor is a man, right? A man, and what is his action? Pleasing the Lord, right? So when a man pleases the Lord, then there's a second actor, he. That's the Lord. It's not the man. He maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. So the Lord is the one that makes the enemies at peace, not you. And it's oftentimes easy for us to confuse the things, and we just try and force our enemy to be at peace with us. And in doing so, we don't spend our effort in focusing on our own actions, please the Lord, right? Make sure that we participate in the right actions and let the other folks participate in their right actions as well. There's Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. This is in that same sermon that Jesus is talking about, and he gives us this kind of response when people will see what we are doing and our actions are doing the right thing. And he says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." So in looking at that verse, though, and comparing it with all of the things that he's listed out and he's laid out in Luke chapter 6 that are part of this Sermon on the Mount, how easy is it? And this is kind of a thought-provoking question, at least hopefully it's thought-provoking. How easy is it for the people that you impact, that you are connected to, that you come into contact with, how easy is it for those people to glorify God because of you? It's not how easy is it for those people to glorify God, right? That's not Matthew 5:16. Matthew 5:16 is because of you. So the person at the Publix cash register, the Target employee who doesn't have any clue where the thing is that you asked for, the coworker who you've worked with for 7 years and they don't even know that you go to church. When we start putting it into that kind of a context, and how easy is it for the person that I'm connected to, that I am impacting, that I'm a part of their life, how easy is it for that person to glorify God because they know me, because they interacted with me? That really puts it into a perspective of looking back at Luke chapter 6 and saying, yeah, these other things are really not that big of a deal. A smite on the cheek, taking of the coat, etc. No one likes having enemies, right? I mean, if I were to say, who wants enemies? Yay! No, nobody likes having enemies. We get them. They happen. And Jesus promised believers that you would have them, that people would hate the believer because of him, because they hated him. We know that, right? But there's also a blueprint. He gave us a blueprint for destroying these enemies, right? And that is through Christ-like love. Christ-like love is what that destruction is. So when personal injustice comes our way, don't respond like the world does, because that's easy. Tit for tat. You got me, I'll get you back. You push my buttons, I'll push yours. However you want to phrase it, it's all the same. It's not the golden rule. The golden rule from Luke chapter 6 and from Jesus Christ's teaching and Jesus Christ's example is respond as God directed us to. Overcome evil with good. Any questions or comments before we finish out the time? We're just about done. I won't cut into choir practice any, but hopefully it was a challenge to you. Okay, let's have a word of prayer. God, thank you for tonight and for our time to study your word. Thank you for giving us a sermon that we can study from your own mouth, and we can learn from. Help us to challenge the way that we think so that we think more like you, we act more like you, and we don't respond as the world would, but rather we destroy our enemies by responding the way you would. Give us a good evening, the rest of the evening, as many go their separate ways now, or go into choir practice, give a good time together, give safety, and bring us back together at the next appointed hour. We ask all this in your precious Son's name. Amen.